So is this scene is near Bethel, New York, and I thought it might be a good exercise coming off of last week's foggy street scene to try and do something with a stream and wooded areas. Um, it's to me, in some ways, it's a little bit more complex, and I think it's going to be a good challenge because um, you know there's overall like it could be seen as kind of pretty flat in terms of the colors, just like the last painting, maybe even less colors because it's pretty much like ochres and kind of dullish fall colors that are remaining. But there's a chance to show some layers here. We have the background. We have um, the hill in the distance. It's actually a lake back there that's frozen over before you get to the woods. And I'll treat that area as kind of like a cooler background. And then we'll just we'll apply some of the same techniques from last week in terms of the foggy, the foliage, bare trees, but there's some places here where we have so many bunches of like little branches and twigs that it almost like looks like a light wash of a color. So um, yeah, let's get started. So it's pretty simple in terms of the shapes and the composition, right? And then we have this stream. Um, it's like the overflow from the lake. The lake is just beyond these trees. Um, so there's just kind of a sliver of white back here um, that I'll try to reserve a little bit. And then in terms of the stream, we have the winding um, we have the winding stream. It starts out really narrow in the back, and then these winding areas, it'll get larger and wider, right? So that's roughly how that is. Um, very loose like this. Yeah, so that's roughly the composition. That's pretty much it. Um, Pretty simple, right? And so,
Yeah.
um, do you have a question?
No, no, I just agreeing with you.
Yeah. So you can see there's some similarities in how we'll deal with this, like compared with last week's. Um, I am going to, I think the snow in the foreground is pretty white. So the value, I'm going to treat that as the white of the paper. I'll use the white of the paper
Yeah.
to show the snow. And that means I think the sky is actually, it's grayer. It's definitely it's dialed back a little bit from the brightness of the snow. I don't know if you can tell from the picture what it looks like on your end, but to me, I think it's okay to use the white of the paper here. So I'm going to wet the surface. I'm going to use my large flat brush again and just going to get the background. And I'm kind of stopping at that line that's at the base of the woods, base of the hill in the back.
The top of the tree line.
No, I'm going all the way beyond the tree line down to like the bottom of the bottom of the hills. So the bottom of the tree line. And then there's like,
Oh, to the white,
yeah, there's
to
kind of
the
a
snow
slip.
line.
Yeah, there's the lake that's covered in snow. I'm going to leave that white. Um, Yeah, so I'm gonna put that brush down. I'm going to just set up some of my gray in the dish. I'm doing the ultramarine again. And I'm going to use the burnt sienna. Testing it out a little bit. Just diluting it a little bit more. And then I only really need a little bit. See how fast I'm going across with the brush?
Yeah.
It just helps to have consistent, even strokes all the way across. And this way I'm not really fussing with any particular spot, but I'm using my forearm to go all the way across, back and forth. So that's a pretty good shade of gray, I think. It's going to dry lighter, of course, but that's fine because I don't want it to be like, I don't want it to be that dark. So now, interestingly, the water, there's areas of the water where like kind of, it's kind of uneven, but there's areas of the water that have that same value of the sky. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to wet I'm gonna wet the stream and just I'm gonna make sure I cover the areas. Sorry?
Well, I just had a phone call. I just told him I'd call him back.
Okay, no worries. And I just filled in the stream all the way from left to right. And I'm just literally adding in some of that same shade into the water. Later on, so I made sure I had enough coverage of water throughout the whole width of the stream from back to front. And I just dropped in that same shade of the sky in the middle of it, in the middle of like the flow of water, because I want it to be like diffused. And later on, I'm going to go back in, I'm going to re-wet the water, and I'm going to put in other, darker tones and the reflections as you see it in the picture. I'm looking at the hill in the background, and I want to convey that it's set pretty far back, right? It's the background. We can. I would want to give it a hint of blue, and I think that will. It's kind of just to warm it up a little bit from to contrast it from the sky, but not too much. I don't want to call too much attention to the background, but I need to basically add some more values to the tree line, to the hills, to set it off from the background, and making sure I have some blue tints in there will help to keep it far enough in the background. So I'm gonna try. I'm going to try this indent throne. I'm wondering if some greens should be in there or not. So I'm kind of just testing it out on this paper. And I might want to do that. I might want to add a little bit of this perylene
This is
green.
for the trees in the background.
Yes. And so I'm adding a bit of the indent throne blue and the perylene green. And I think that's going to be a nice, cool enough, but just green enough so we know that it's trees. And I think this paper, it's dry enough. And if you look closely at that, at the hills, it's not an even, it's almost like there's like wisps of like clouds or fog throughout. So I'm not going to do like a really even coverage there. I just want to have enough to hint, and I've wet it, so I'm just I'm filling in, just dropping in some pigment here and there, and leaving just enough, hints of the tops of trees. You don't want too much because you don't want to draw too much attention to it. Really sharp edges. So I can tell that that's going to be pretty good for, letting it recede in the background. I'm going to massage that a little bit. Just blur it out a little bit. And try not to introduce too much water back into this. Yeah, so it's pretty faint enough. And that's going to just be, a nice contrast with the trees that are in the mid ground. So I'm kind of just looking at, I'm looking at those tree trunks, looking at how, like, kind of, I'm part like thinking the design we want as we compose the rest of this. How do we want to treat these trunks, the branches, and then just making sure that we leave white space for the snow. And so, and there's also snow on the branches, on some of the branches, like the branches that are going this way. So that might be a nice area to just like keep in mind as we try to reserve space for the snow. Granted, that area is already covered in the gray, but I think we can still manage it. It's we can still convey that it's snow on the branch by just the negative space that we carve out for it. So I think next,
Are you going to use Payne's Gray for that?
Probably. I mean, it's pretty. I mean, yeah, it probably looks dark on the screen when I show it to you like that, but there's, there's hints of warmer colors there. Actually, I'm going to show you on the paper. Like, it's not as warm as that, but if I add some yellow ochre to this, That might that might be the warmest. Maybe not. Um, it might be a little bit too exaggerated if I do that. So I'm trying the burnt sienna in this. Maybe it's too warm. It's too warm. Um, to cool it down, I might do this yellow ochre. And then I'm going to try one of my reds here. Yeah, that may be better to cool it down. So I think that my yellow ochre, again, my trusty yellow ochre, kind of diluted. Will give me a good base for many of those trunks. But I'm also considering how to deal with the brush that's like sort of at the base. The areas that are sort of at the bases of the trunks. It's kind of like brownish.
Yeah.
But again, I don't want it to be too warm. Oops. Just experimenting here. Now it's a little, that's too dark and too blue. Let me wipe this off. I'm going to start with the Perylene green. I'm going to try to add a little bit of the burnt sienna, almost like a camouflage. Yeah, I think that's going to be much closer. So, like last week, where we started filling in some of the wispy, like I call them, I guess, like clouds of branches and twigs. I'm going to do that with some of the ones that are at the top of these bunches, right? Yeah, I guess they're like bunches. So I'm going to add water here. It's okay if my water is kind of dirty. I don't really care too much. Again, this is pretty light, so it's going to be covered up by a lot of like more contrasting branches and trunks. Adding some more water over here. What did we call it last time? Oh, like bramble? I think it's bramble.
Yeah. Thicket, bramble.
Okay, and I'm gonna treat some areas down here in a similar fashion. Those can be darker, so I'm gonna actually make it a little bit richer of a pigment. So using less water. Yeah, I'm going to make it darker. Leaving some white space here for the snow. I'm noticing some darker areas that kind of help provide some depth. We show it like kind of above that white strip. I guess it's like certain areas that are closer to the lake in the background. I'll just kind of lighten those up a little bit. There has to be some interpretation here because I'm not going to try to I'm not going to try to do all the intricate twigs and the tiny pieces. But I am leaving room for what needs to be, I need to let certain white areas show through for sure. And then I need to just keep in mind, like, what are the masses that I'm painting around? So you have a lot of room when you're doing a snowy scene, because so much of it can just be, left up to the imagination because you're leaving so much white space anyway. So I'm not trying to get things exact here, but I am trying to convey like a sense of depth. So richer pigments as we get closer to the front. Using the shape of the brush to my advantage where I can. Just kind of letting the shape of the brush determine how the stroke will end up. And I'm seeing that, this combination, I really like this perylene green and burnt sienna combination. It's pretty versatile. And I'm going to start, in a minute, I'm going to use that to really do like the dark areas of the water. I think that'll be good for conveying that. So I'm going to wet some of this using that green. Just gonna, in the wet part, I'm just carving out, I'm gonna, not carving out, just drop in the pigment where there's reflections in the water, kind of just let it do its thing. I'm not gonna fuss with it too much. There's a nice dark area here under that rock that is in shadow. I'm going to try to make that a little richer. And I'm kind of re-wetting the stream again. I'm going to dry my brush as much as I can so I can load it up with pigment. And I'm going to kind of go over these edges again, some of them. And I'm pulling down for where some of these reflections are. So obviously, because I'm doing these reflections first, I have to kind of make sure they line up roughly with what's actually above ground. So that'll be kind of my other challenge here. But notice I'm doing, it's more on the green end of the spectrum. But that's okay. These will dissolve and kind of get more diffuse. And then I will go back over some of those areas with more pigment to really make those more solid of reflections. All right, and now I'm going to go back to the top, and here we're going to be doing a little bit more browns and the ochre. And I'm just going to put a light touch of some of the ochre in certain spots here. And I'm, because ultimately those are just going to be some highlights. And it's going to be the areas that are slightly closer to us. I'm not going to do too much of it. And I'm going to do some down here to show the foliage, the dead foliage down here. Oh, and I guess there's some up here I want to show too. I don't want to mix that too much though with these greens that are there. Okay. And then I'm going to go back into the trunks with a darker, I'm going to use the burnt umber. And, you know, interestingly, some of these, the trunks in the background, they kind of bunch together. So they're almost like indistinguishable from each other. So I think it's okay if we actually paint them. We paint them so that they're indistinguishable at the bottom. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So I'm kind of just filling in like the lower edges of these trunks. And I'm not trying to be careful about painting individual trunks here. Just separate enough to like give the impression. There is this larger one that I want to make sure I get here. But overall, you know, there's a bunch that are like back here. Also using the shape of my brush to my advantage. You know, sometimes the edges of the brush, they're not neatly, they're not creating neat lines, and that's fine. And I definitely want to go darker with, as they go higher up. Actually, there's still the ones that are closer to us are darker. But I think I will add a little bit of blue. Oh, that was too much. I wanted to cool that down a little bit. Yeah, I'll use that to kind of get at some of these. You know, I'm extending the trunks here in the back just by using this lighter, cooler version of that brown mixture. And it just gives more of an impression of they're further away, they're wispy. You know, very, very rough. I think it's okay. And then I'm going to go in, maybe I'll let that dry a little bit. I'm going to try to refine the things that are happening in the closer to us. I'm actually going to start using some Payne's Gray again. I'm going to mix it into this green-brown mixture that I had. Again, I want to make this that rock really dark. And then I want to accentuate the edges here of the shore. Yeah. And then actually, I'm gonna some of the darkest areas of these reflections. I want that to be more diffuse. So yeah, this is kind of, there's many ways to do these reflections in the water. I wouldn't say I'm a master at this, but it's a fun challenge. Could go over all of that, kind of blend it together, and then let it just flow. Again, sometimes just getting the right difference in value goes such a long way to conveying the shapes and contours of these things, and they're just like, they become instantly recognizable, even if you can't really. It's hard to tell. It's abstract. It's not. I'm not trying to do a literal depiction here. I'm going to go in the back here. Any questions so far?
No. No questions.
All right, and then I'm gonna try to deal with more of these trunks. Gonna add a little Payne's gray to them. Again, you have to kind of like feel your way with the brush. Sometimes as you go up, they narrow in width. So let ease up on the pressure on the brush in order to have a narrower narrower stroke. And that just takes a little bit of practice, I think. Hard to get consistent. You can see how once I start adding the darks down here, it really helps to give more sense of depth and volume. And also it helps to confirm, the direction of the light. which here actually, because it's a very overcast, it's actually pretty overcast. So there's not a very clear direction of light that I can really hint at. So yeah, wherever there's a prominent trunk that I've done above ground, I want to kind of match it a little bit in the reflections, so there's some believability there. And again, because there's not an even amount of like dark trunks all the way from top to bottom. The values really kind of there's
I'm on with branches.
so what helps to get across like this sense of water is if you kind of go back over everything and give it a few like currents or I can actually just lift a little bit in some of these areas and it just feels more like it's water flowing. In that the images are really just reflections, right? And not they're not actually sitting in space there. Just adding a little bit of dark to these blades of the grass in front to give it a little bit of dimension. And I don't want these to just end in midair, but I want there to be some gradual disappearing of the tops of these trees. There's some areas here I should deal with. Painting these scenes also is a way of coping with the cold weather here. Like,
Yeah. Is it pretty cold right now?
it's actually warmer today than it has been in a while. So it's like in the almost in the 40s. Um, but we had a really, really cold stretch the last few days. And a lot of times I'll paint fall type of scenes as a way to cope. But when you find a beautiful snowy scene, it's also kind of cathartic, and you appreciate, that you can't get these scenes all the time. So yeah, it's oh, I didn't even bother. So I'm gonna try to capture this branch here that has snow on it, and I'm gonna kind of let's play around with the negative space here. I'm gonna do two pieces here, and let's see if we can kind of trick our way. And I'm gonna probably end up doing some lifting here, lifting to make some snow. See, I'm drawing the ends of, I'm doing some branches above the tree that's going to have, above the branch that is going to have some snow on it, because I want to have some, I'm implying the outline of the snow. I'm going to wait for that to dry a little bit. Um, it's really fun to do snow scenes, because you actually are covering less of the paper. So it's a lot of the scenes already there for you, literally.
Right.
You notice that I use the same brush like throughout many of my paintings, and part of that is
Yeah.
um, I feel like I want to have a more consistent feel to the whole piece, and if I switch brushes too often, sometimes it becomes like a little obvious that um, some parts I switched up, and that may just be me, but um, I feel like there's more of a cohesive feel when you're using the same brush. I don't know if that makes sense, but
Well, I see it. I see it work for you. I can say that.
But here, what I will do is I'm going to switch the brush because I want a very stark, I want a stark appearance where there is snow. And I'm going to try to make this happen here. So the snow would be right here on this branch. Starting to come off. See that?
Yeah, that's really nice.
And that'll dry very light. And I'm going to do the same down here on this branch. And then what I can do is darken the underside of that branch so it stands out even more.
You have to let it dry before it can lift a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, yes, because like if I want, it depends on the effect you want around the edges of it, because I wanted the edges around it to be pretty sharp, to be pretty yeah, and it would be harder to do that if the surface was all wet. Yeah, so I just created a bit of a snow effect on a branch there, even though it was already covered in paint. So now I'm using the smaller brush to actually indicate like smaller branches and trunks in the distance. I think that's where it does help. You know, if you need to be more, obviously it'll look like it's more in the distance if it's smaller strokes. It's harder to get the smaller strokes with a larger brush, obviously. So that is where it comes in handy. But I kind of view those as like finishing touches. Yeah. Give a little bit, little bits of ground showing through, so it's not just completely white paper. Very close to being done here. In the back, I'm going to use this smaller brush to do the finer edges of the shore line. And again, the things in the foreground, they deserve a little bit more attention. So I'm okay with having a little bit more contrast and detail. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it.
Looks great,
Thank you.
Francis.